morning. My name is Alex Kelly and I'm speaking to you from Avon Valley Churches, a group of 7 churches on the northwestern edge of the New Forest in Hampshire. This morning I want to talk to you about loss. We're living in a time of our lives where we've seen huge amounts of loss. As a country, we've now seen well over 30,000 deaths in the last couple of months from COVID-19, a number that is heartbreaking in so many ways. But loss is not just about death. We are all experiencing other kinds of loss, a loss of routine, loss of freedom, a loss of work, and for some, most of all, the loss of human contact. Some of you know that I work with people with learning disabilities and autism. And in the last 30 years, I've had to support so many people to understand a loss of some kind. I remember the mother of one of the people we support phoning me up one day to say that her dad had died, and she had tried to tell her daughter, who has Down syndrome, but she couldn't make her understand. And we knew that if Poppy didn't understand, then she would still look for him every morning on the way to her day services. She'd still expect to have lunch with him on Sunday. And if she didn't know this, she'd get confused and upset or angry. So Brian and I sat down with Poppy when she arrived at Speaking Space, and we explained to her that her granddad had died. We did it through a social story, using pictures and simple words. And Poppy understood the story, and she cried. We then helped her to understand the funeral and how many sleeps there were until that day. And Poppy understood and went to the funeral. And over the next year or so, we continued to help Poppy to talk about her granddad, to feel sad, to read her story when she wanted to. Every time I support someone to understand a loss, I feel privileged that someone has trusted me to support a person to understand and cope with their loss. And there are 4 things I try to do. Firstly, to help them to accept the reality of the loss, and I usually do this through a story, like I did with Poppy. Secondly, to help them work through the pain of grief, to help them to understand and talk about those difficult feelings. Thirdly, to help them to adjust to their new reality. Maybe they have to move house, or they don't have lunch with their granddad on a Sunday anymore. And finally, to help them to find a way to remember that person that has died. So talking about them, making a memory box maybe, lighting a candle. It's so important to be able to support anyone to understand and cope with a loss. But having a learning disability can make it so much harder for them. And if we don't help them to understand, they can live their lives confused and upset. I remember being told about a young lady who kept saying to her carers that she wanted to go on holiday to Devon. She went on and on about it, and they didn't know why and just kept saying things like, yes, maybe one day. And then one day, someone took the time to explore this with her. Why did she want to go to Devon? And she said she wanted to see her mum, who had died the year before. You see, she'd misheard. She hadn't understood. And she didn't understand the word heaven. She heard that her mum was in Devon. And then last year, my mum died. And I would like to spend a few minutes telling you about her. Now, if you were lucky enough to have known my mum, you would know that she was an amazing woman. Dynamic, passionate, organised, straight talking, a bit bossy, and with the biggest heart ever. I'd like to show you a picture actually of her. So that's my mum there. And she had the most amazing faith that permeated everything. She spent her whole life loving and serving God. And she was the main reason Brian and I started coming to church 4 years ago. When Mum died, one of the things we had to do was to help Dad to go through all of her stuff. So we had to go through her handbag, her bits and bobs in her bedside table, her special box. And what struck us was that in everything, everywhere we looked, there were prayers tucked in somewhere, There were praying hands, Bible verses, all reminders of her love of God. And what probably had the biggest impact on me was her prayer diary, a little notebook that, judging from her writing, she kept right up until the end. People's names, with often a little note next to them with what she was specifically praying for. Even people we had asked her to pray for that she'd never met. But I'd actually like to tell you about her death, because if you'd been lucky enough to be with her in that last week, you would have seen and felt the presence of God totally and completely. Because not only did Mum love God, but it was so apparent that God loved her. So 6 days before she died, I was the one who happened to be there with Mum and Dad when their lovely GP asked Mum if she wanted to go into hospital to be treated for her chest infection. Mum knew what the GP was asking, and so we asked her if we could have a bit of time to make that decision. Mum, Dad and I sat together, holding hands, and I prayed with them. I don't know what I said, but I know that I asked God to be with us, to comfort us and to guide us. When I opened my eyes, I looked at Mum, and I've never seen her look so beautiful and peaceful. Her eyes were closed, her head was turned up, and she had a hint of a smile on her face. Eventually she opened her eyes, looked at Dad, and said she wanted to stay at home. And those last 6 days were obviously heartbreaking, but they were also so beautiful. Firstly, I come from a very large family of 6 brothers and sisters, and amazingly, all 6 of us were in the country, a rare thing indeed. Then there was the sunshine, the spring flowers, and Mum always loved the spring. And then a family friend who was a bishop was able to come and give us communion on the Saturday, in the last few hours when Mum was conscious. The day before she died, I was with her as the day was beginning to break, and I decided to read to her that day's reading from the book Jesus Calling. That's the book there. And on that day, the 24th of February, I read it to her. It's written as if Jesus is talking to you. And it said, "Be still in the light of my presence while I communicate love to you. You are constantly aware of limitations, your own and others. But there is no limit to my love. It fills all of space, time and eternity. Now you see me through a glass, but someday you will see me face to face. Then you will be able to experience fully how wide and long and high and deep is my love for you. You have an eternity ahead of you, absolutely guaranteed, during which you can enjoy my presence in unrestricted ecstasy. For now, the knowledge of my loving presence is sufficient to carry you through this day." What amazing words for Mum to hear as she neared her death. And the next day, on the day of her death, we also read these words together. "Rest in my presence, allowing me to take charge of this day." And do you know what we did? We relaxed a bit, as the nurses didn't actually think she would die that day. She seemed so stable. So we just all breathed a bit and enjoyed the day. We took it in turns to go out and enjoy the sunshine. We had the windows wide open. We read to her, we sang to her. And then in the evening, I told her we were going to watch a film with Dad. I kissed her, I told her I loved her, and she died while we were downstairs, laughing with Dad. You see, Mum was a great organiser. She was at her best when there was something to be planned, something to organise in the best possible way. She had high standards and she made sure they were followed. Of course, I knew that Mum didn't plan her death, but I couldn't help thinking that if she had planned it, she would have planned it exactly the way it happened. I mean, maybe she had actually written a list that God was following. Who knows? But what we do know is that she is now where she wanted to be. She's with the God she spent 89 years loving, serving, praising and trusting. And we know that someday we will see her again. You see, my mum taught me so many things. I was so lucky to have her as my mum. But the best thing she taught me was to have faith. But nearly a year on, I actually wasn't coping with my grief. I was often low, lethargic and tearful. I was struggling with work, with praying, with my confidence, and even with communicating with people. It was the beginning of 2020, so not that many few months ago, and Brian had persuaded me to book an appointment to see my GP. But then on the 5th of January, I went to the New Year Sanctus service. Mike gave us some time in the middle of the service to reflect on the new year, and he had some postcards at the back of the church that we could pick up if they seemed relevant to us. So I wandered to the back and looked at the 50-odd postcards, and one of them jumped out at me. I want to show you the picture now. This is the postcard. I picked it up, and as I sat down with it, I felt that God was saying to me, "Let her go. I have her. Trust in me." It was one of the most amazing things I've experienced. And the next day I went on a long dog walk and I felt more words coming to me. So I went home and wrote a poem. And I'd actually like to read it to you now. It's called "Hold Out Your Hand, My Child." Hold out your hand, my child. Your grief is far too real. I'm stretching out my hand to you. I'm waiting here to heal. Hold out your hand, my child. Don't grasp to grief so tight. You're so weighed down by worry, by the emptiness at night. Hold out your hand, my child. Give to me your grief. It's stopping you from living, and with it you can't breathe. Hold out your hand, my child. Let me take away your pain. Let me help you to stand up so you can stand tall again. Hold out your hand, my child. Let me take your fear away. Let me comfort you and guide you through the night and through the day. Hold out your hand, my child. You need to trust in me. I hold her closely in my arms. She's safely here. You'll see. I can take your hand, my child. I can wipe away those tears. I'll fill that hole inside you and I'll take away your fears. Your wounds are deep, my child, but now the year has passed. Call out my name, reach out your hand, and know this pain won't last. My hand is holding yours, my child. Look, see what we can do. Turn your face to face me now, together, me and you. My hand is holding yours, my child. Your hand is holding mine. Step out in faith and look around. The sun has yet to shine. My hand's now held up high, my Lord. I give her now to you. I release my pain, but hold her love. I put my trust in you. We're living through an extraordinary time with so much loss, so much grief, so much uncertainty. Psalm 77 says, "When I was in distress, I sought the Lord." So I pray that we will all find strength to seek the Lord and place our trust in our Heavenly Father. My mum's favourite quote was from a man called Stephen Grellet, a French-born American Quaker, who said, "I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good thing, therefore, that I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any fellow creature, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again." Let us end in prayer. God of love and mercy, embrace all those whose hearts today overflow with grief and a sense of loss. For those who mourn, immerse them in your love. hold them close through the coming days, and lead them through this darkness into your arms and light. For those who comfort them, be in both the words they use and all that's left unspoken. Fill each heart with love, and help us to pass through this time with kindness. We ask this through Jesus Christ, whose own suffering brought us life, here and for eternity. Amen. I hope you have a good day, and then I'm sure I will see some of you again soon. Bye-bye.